Coming up, new NAGPRA rules are in effect. We dive into their impact on Indian country. Plus, for many natives, tobacco is sacred, but smoking cigarettes is not. Want to quit? There's an app for that. And in honor of Women's History Month, we chat with a retired professor who's all about keeping Hawaiian traditions alive. That's next on the ICT Newscast.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.
Support for the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez comes from the Arizona PBS studios in Phoenix at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communications at Arizona State University.
Amida Hopa, thank you for joining us. I am Aaliyah Chavez. New rules governing the Native American Protection and Repatriation Act, also known as NAGPRA, went into effect this year, and they pack a lot into it. They center Native voices and dramatically change how museums and other institutions interact with the Native peoples in repatriations of ancestral remains and sacred objects. Stuart Huntington has more on this sea change.
The new rules sent museums across the country scrambling to hide some indigenous items from public view as officials worked to comply with changes to the law.
We've been living with the regulations which were originally passed in 1995, and they've been horrible. They didn't even define the term consultation, so institutions have been able to use the past regulations to really just absolve themselves of any responsibility under NAGPRA. So these brand new regulations that went into effect on January 12th are a complete change. They're a sea change from what the regulations were.
The new regulations, published in the Federal Register, mandate a fundamental shift in priorities at institutions. The Field Museum in Chicago and the Peabody Museum at Harvard have blocked off exhibits. The American Museum of Natural History in New York closed 2 major halls. Right behind me here used to be the entrance to the Eastern Woodlands and Great Plains halls. They are both now closed to the public.
There were about 1,600 objects that fell into the category of either funerary object or sacred object or cultural patrimony. And it really felt appropriate both because of the scale of the objects that were there, but also because those were halls that were not consistent with our current framework and expectation about how Native voices are included in the narrative and the story. So we made the decision to close 2 of our halls.
So a lot of museums are like freaking out. They're looking around and saying, we better take this stuff off of display. Some of this has a question mark. What if it's determined that this actually is funerary related? We could be in trouble. And so there have been some museums that have taken things off of display, and there have been quite a few that have been re-examining their inventory and making sure they have done their due diligence to communicate and even understand their own holdings.
NAGPRA was passed by Congress in 1990 to protect Native graves and ensure repatriation of remains and cultural patrimony through consultation with tribes, Native Hawaiians, and Alaska Natives. But the law lacked teeth. Institutions held on to remains and items using terms like unaffiliated or unidentifiable. Native peoples have long complained.
Institutions were simply declaring collections of ancestors and their burial belongings as unaffiliated, even though there was information in the record. Even just geography is enough. And so the new regulations not only close that loophole, they do away with the term of culturally unidentifiable. And the institutions who created those culturally unidentifiable lists are going to have to go back and actually do the consultation that they were supposed to do to begin with.
In addition, the new rules give deference to indigenous knowledge, a critical change. and they require public organizations to obtain free, prior, and informed consent from tribes before exhibiting cultural items. They also set a 5-year deadline for compliance.
We're really excited to see the work that's going to be done under these new regulations. We hope that institutions will finally get the drift of what they're supposed to do with NAGPRA. For the longest time, they simply sat on their hands. After all, they are the ones who are in possession of stolen property. They are the ones who have the legal obligations under NAGPRA.
Stuart Huntington, ICT News.
This was the first segment in our series on the major changes to the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. Tomorrow, we learn why repatriation is so important to Native communities and beyond. To watch the entire series, plus access to extended interviews, and to read more about these important changes, go to ictnews.org. In California, the city of Berkeley has voted to return sacred land to the Ohlone. The return comes after decades of litigation and community outcry to transfer the land permanently. ICT's Mackenzie Allen Charmley has the details.
Ohlone people and the community rejoiced last week over the return of sacred native land dating back thousands of years. The move rights a historic wrong and restores the land, now called Berkeley, to the people who were first on it. The 2.2-acre parking lot is the only undeveloped portion of the Shell Mound in West Berkeley, where ancestors of today's Ohlone people established the first human settlement on the shores of the San Francisco Bay 5,700 years ago.
And the Berkeley City Council adopted an ordinance giving title of the land to the Sogorea Te Land Trust. And this deal results in a major urban land back victory on par with any in the history of the state of California. Berkeley made history, and we did it by honoring the first people who live on this land. And this historic step is critical to righting past wrongs and embracing a future that honors the diverse history of the entire region.
Berkeley City Council voted unanimously last Tuesday to adopt an ordinance giving the title of the land to the Sogorea Te Land Trust, a San Francisco Bay Area collective led by women that works to return land to indigenous people. The collective raised most of the money needed to reach the agreement with developers who own the land.
We want to restore the native landscape, daylight the creek that flows through this area. We want to plant native medicines, native foods, so that we can again gather and tend to our traditional relatives, the rooted ones, the plants that give us life, give us medicine. We want to create habitat for the pollinators and the wildlife to come back and have an urban oasis for the native relatives of this area.
The site, a 3-block area Berkeley designated as a landmark in 2000, will be home to native medicines and foods, an oasis for pollinators and wildlife, and a place for youth to learn about their heritage.
We're getting our land that belongs to us, and I tell everybody that I see every day that this land is our land. We're still here. We've never left. My family's never left Alameda County, ever, since time began. And we're still here.
According to officials, the Sogorea Te Land Trust contributed $25.5 million, and Berkeley paid $1.5 million.
And I am happy, and I'm proud, and yay!
For ICT News, Mackenzie Allen Charmley.
Tobacco is a sacred medicine for many Native Americans. However, commercial tobacco and smoking cigarettes is not. In fact, the American Indian Cancer Foundation says that American Indian and Alaska Natives have the highest rate of smoking in the country. Wyatt Pickner, a research manager at the foundation, talks with ICT producer Shirley Sneve about the issues.
A lot of that, is due to how tobacco was commercialized, and really, looking back to how a lot of our cultural practices were outlawed until the late 1970s. And so, a lot of people were going to use commercial tobacco because that was legal. And, it also doesn't seem all that long ago. And some of those habits and practices are just, some of the things that people are still going to. Traditional tobacco is not always easily accessible for a lot of our communities and our relatives. And so there are efforts being made to revitalize some of that and get people access to that. But in the meantime, we do just see a lot of, use of commercial tobacco. And we know that there's still a long history of people who, have become addicted to nicotine and are using those commercial tobacco products. And so, through our efforts at ACAP, we are striving to recognize the history of tobacco in our communities and the significance that it plays in many of our lives as, Indigenous people. And how do we lift up that traditional side of it and the, viewing it as a medicine, and then also helping to encourage people to move away from commercial tobacco products, but knowing that it's not going to be, a very quick transition. And so, we have to provide accessible and intentional steps and messaging and information and resources to make that a reality for the people that we're looking to engage with. We do have a traditional tobacco website that is currently launched and available, and that is just traditionaltobacco.org. And so it provides some good information about, just like the significance and role that tobacco plays in our communities, and, also provides an opportunity for you to engage and share your own story of tobacco, because we know everyone has their own, knowledge and history and relationship with it. And so we want to be able to lift that up and embrace those sort of things. The National Cancer Institute has an initiative called the Smoke Free Initiative. And so there's a website, smokefree.gov, that lists a variety of different resources, including a smartphone application, a texting program, and some of these have been tailored for specific populations like veterans or, moms and different age groups, including teens. And so we partnered with the National Cancer Institute and the Indian Health Service, as well as some collaborators at the University of Minnesota, to tailor the texting program, the smoke-free text program, for American Indian Alaska Native populations. And so this program, the tailored version, is called Smoke-Free Native. Alaska Native people who smoke, that this isn't just a automated program that, random messages are coming. We really put a lot of thought and intention into the development of these messages to ensure that, the people using the program, that there's a whole community that is behind, the people wanting to quit smoking, to provide that support. And we're talking through them through the text messages. We even have direct quotes from, former smokers, or other people who have been like tobacco treatment specialists, or other people from ACAF, leading and doing this work, and just like advice and support and guidance and tips and tricks. How can we incorporate ideas around land back and language, because thinking about those things are strategies to help, distract you from wanting to quit smoking, and ways to re-engage with culture, because that's one of our taglines at ACAF is healing with culture. Quitting is not everyone's successful the first time. It might take a couple of different times to quit smoking, but I think the point being that, don't give up in that quitting journey. You sometimes have to try different methods and figure out what works for you. I think part of that process is identifying, what are your the triggers that, make you want to smoke, and working to address some of those things. And so, it's just getting started and not giving up.
We Ride for Her is a short documentary about a group of women motorcyclists who ride across the U.S. to raise awareness for the MMIR crisis. The journey for the women is very personal. Daniel Herrera spoke with the film's protagonists about their experience.
I want to get right into it. Can someone explain to me who the medicine wheel riders are?
Sure, I can. We are an Indigenous women's motorcycle group, and we're made up of women from many nations and many tribes. And we create awareness events to raise funds to help families of missing and murdered Indigenous women. We've also helped, victims of sex trafficking and survivors of violence. And we kind of do cross-country rides to raise awareness. And we usually end up, at Sturgis at the motorcycle rally in South Dakota.
I asked Heather the same question.
A wonderful group of women raising awareness for missing, murdered, Indigenous exploitation subjects I feel that are difficult to talk about. But they're out there bringing awareness and doing it in a courageous manner and honoring all of the victims and families that are that have been affected by everything that they are representing for our community, our Native women. And it's not just the women, but it's women, children, and men.
I proceeded to ask Heather and Lorna what the documentary is about.
The movie entails, I guess kind of the journey of like how, as writers, as the medicinal writers, how we kind of came together, and formed a group to help bring awareness. And, we wanted to make a difference in our own communities. And so we came together.
It goes through the reality of what it is to experience a family member who has become a missing person. And the medicine wheel writers and the documentary itself give a voice to that heartache and that journey, the experience, the personal experience of losing, my sister, who is very near and dear to me, and it's very heartbreaking to talk about and to put words into the emotion, because it truly does take your breath away. What happened and where is she? Unanswered questions and the grief. Grief is such a natural part of our lives. But someone so young and loved who is missing and has a daughter, and she's the youngest of our family, of our 5 siblings. We don't know what happened to her. So to answer your question about what the documentary is about, and to try not to give away too much, it's the reality of what it is to be that family member with all those questions and how and what and why, and then you have these very supportive, wonderful, loving group of women who are there to lift you up and to help carry you and give a voice to your tragedy. Their personal experiences with having a family member who is missing give me strength. It gives other families strength in seeing how courageous and driven that they are, and it gives me strength. It does. And knowing that there are people there that care for us, the family members, and they have also been affected and have personal experience with it. And so that's who they are, their strength and their voice and their courage, and what they do is very honorable. It's a hard subject to discuss sexual exploitation, to discuss murder, to discuss, all of those difficult topics.
The documentary We Ride for Her premiered earlier this month. I asked Heather how it feels to have her story told.
I feel grateful to have been a part of it, but also every time I talk about it, I'm grateful to have had the opportunity, but also on the other end of that, very sad and heartbroken that it was my sister who is part of that story. Grateful also for all of the support and encouragement and healing that has come with sharing her story. She's the youngest of 5, but it's her story. It's her daughter's story, her daughter Sadie. And I wish that it wasn't us. But I'm grateful that there will be others who will find healing and strength from this story, from this documentary.
March is Women's History Month to celebrate the women who have made a difference in our lives and the lives of their native nations. Here's an encore presentation of an interview from our archives about a multimedia artist championing Native art processes. This retired professor works in the Hawaiian art of Kaa Making, and she does it from the ground up. Shirley Sneve interviews Miley Andrade.
It starts with the bark of the paper mulberry tree. Hawaiians call it wake. With a shift grant from the Native Arts and Culture Foundation, Miley Andrade is partnering with a nature preserve to grow it for Kaa Making.
Holu'aina is in the island. So I live in Kauai, which is an outer island. And so my practice here with the grant, we're doing the same thing that Holu'aina is going to be doing, but the one in Kauai is going to be smaller and more private. The one in Holu'aina will be open to the public because Honolulu is its base, and access to more people, and it's tucked back in the valley, Kalihi Valley. And you could be in the city like in 10 minutes, but then when you go back into the valley, you're like in the country. And Holu'aina is run by Puni Jackson, who was one of my students at the university, who is now has an MFA in painting and drawing, but now runs this beautiful community center. I found the challenging part of practicing our culture is resources. And lots of people wanted to learn the skill, but before you can even get the skill, you need to have stuff to work from. And most of the things that we use in our culture to practice our skill isn't something you just go to a store and buy. So you have to grow it, you have to harvest it. And I'm trying to discourage my students from just going into the forest and just taking. If you're a beginner, that's not probably the best practice. I think you should practice first and become more proficient in what you're doing before you can go to the forest. Hopefully, we want to be able to create a group on all the islands that we can just practice. And I'm not practicing kapa in a sense where I want to bring it back as an art form. We really want to practice and make pieces for ceremony. There's a lot of artists just making pieces to sell and make money, which it's not a bad thing because you got to make a living at it. But for me, I feel that it's not a priority to do that. I think the priority is to be able to make pieces that can serve our community, our Hawaiian community, in burials or in clothing for ceremony or for births or weddings, the way traditionally these pieces were used. the extension of the traditional, or traditional is a tricky word, or customary practices of kappa, today, how do we take it into the future? And so it would be paper making, print making, books, and how do we continue telling the stories for our younger students, for the next generation or the generation after. And that's sort of what I'm interested in, how do we not lose the ike, or the knowledge of our ancestors?
Shirley Sneve, ICT News.
Woolly, thank you. Woolly is good. So woolly one is thank you in a good way.
That is a slice of our Indigenous world. For all the latest, visit ictnews.org. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.